Uncle Fester was a serial killer. We are talking the R.I.P. Man from 2025, directed by Jamie Langland, who also co-wrote the movie. And this is a very low budget British slasher movie. The budget was around £20,000. And the story actually takes place in Brighton, which is actually on the south coast of England. Not actually that too far away from where I live, in actual fact. And we have a serial killer who has been incarcerated in a mental facility for years because he has some type of degenerative disease in his mouth that causes him to kind of lose teeth and everything. And this has caused him to become, spiral into depression, anxiety, etc., which has led to him becoming a dangerous psychopath. He escapes and is on the rampage, and because his affliction causes him to lose his teeth, he's kind of MO, his signature kill is almost that of a killer dentist, where he forcibly extracts people's teeth after killing them. And it focuses on two kind of concurrent storylines: a group of university-age young people as they seem to be targeted, and secondly, the police investigation trying to catch this killer. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? Now, as always, when we are talking about a very low budget movie, we have to have the expectations in check and think, what can this movie afford to do? What is the best we can expect from a £20,000 film? So I would say it's actually got quite a large cast. So when you have a low budget movie, sometimes you'll have a relative short, small cast, because obviously they can't afford to obviously pay a lot of actors. This one, it has a decent sized cast. As I say, we have really two groups of protagonists, plus various kind of supporting characters as well. So we do have quite a large cast, just as many kind of characters in this movie as you would see in like a high budget movie, the likes of kind of Scream and things like this. So kind of a large casts, which, you get different people's kind of point of views and things like this, the various kind of different red shirts to be killed and kind of red herrings and things like this. So the scale of this movie is clearly not been too affected by its kind of limited budget. It is trying to have a kind of a classic kind of slasher storyline with a relatively large cast. And in kind of one of the storylines involving a lot of this cast is the police storyline. Now, I would say I actually quite liked this storyline quite a bit, because it feels more realistic to certainly a kind of English police force. The police storyline actually involves investigating. I've seen many kind of like films that have police characters where we never really actually seem to do any police work, to be honest. They really rarely seem to actually investigate things. Here, I'm kind of pleased to say our police characters do actually seem like they are investigating. They are going to locations, they're investigating crimes, they're interviewing witnesses, they're following up leads. And it's done in a way which is this kind of slightly, maybe subdued way. More of an administrative way is what I would say, and you might argue that maybe this is a little on the quieter, maybe a little more on the less dynamic side, but I will say I think it's probably more on the realistic side in many ways, because a lot of police work is administration. And we see this kind of like this police station, and there's no like perps being like walked through struggling to get out. It's just a lot of bobbies on the computers and things like this. So I actually thought the more restrained depiction of these police, methodically going through the kind of the evidence, interviewing people, doing office work and things like that, it has a more of a realistic vibe to it, which I kind of appreciate, because I do feel it sometimes is sorely lacking in the, you know, in movies, especially low budget movies. Now, in regard to the killer itself, having a killer which primarily attacks one's mouth is a horrifying thought, because obviously there is a real fear of the dentist, and it's a common phobia. And often people are skittish about having dental work done, teeth removed and fillings and things like that. And although there have been obviously kind of dental related slasher movies before, I still feel it's somewhat of an untapped real fear that people could relate to, if that makes sense. And even though this movie isn't a particularly explicit movie, you know, we do see the drill kind of, you know, being put towards people, and you know, him extracting teeth and things like that. So it's definitely a film where I feel that fear is realised on screen. But you might think, oh, is that the way he kills people? Actually, no. There are actually a variety of ways that this killer actually kills his victims. So it does have a little bit of variety, you know, including, you know, getting a drill to the face. But you know, there's like an automated saw and things like this, slitting of the throat. There's a variety of ways that this killer actually does it. So it tries to vary up the different kind of methods of dispatching people, but we're still always kind of going back to at least harvesting these teeth at the same time as well. The kind of the movie in itself has a variety of different kind of locations and things like that, so I do feel the attempt here has been made to make the movie visually quite interesting. This is kind of the actual production, and again, you've got to look at this from a lower budget perspective. You know, it's well put together in that respect. They actually have even tried to overcome some technical elements here. There appears to be a bit of ADR where clearly lines weren't kind of picked up on in kind of obviously when the movie was kind of filmed and things like that. So there have been, you know, a degree of kind of post-production to try and polish the movie to a degree, to give it more of a, you know, a finish, so to speak. The killer itself looks an interesting idea. You know, he is kind of quite unique looking, I suppose, for a kind of serial killer. And they have given him quite an interesting and surprisingly in-depth backstory. Involving how he's ended up in a mental institution, how he's maybe got involved in some type of cult that has come out of Italy and things like that. So there certainly has been a lot of thought put into the basis of the character and why he is doing certain things, which again leads to the police investigation and things like that. Okay, so let's move to what doesn't work, and we're going to kind of just stay on that. I maybe feel the film is a little bit guilty of having a little bit too much exposition. There is quite a lot of us being told information as the audience, really, rather than kind of like it being shown to us. Now, this is probably a result of the budget, but the backstory is just largely kind of information dumped and stuff like that. Interesting, yes. Surprisingly in-depth, yes. But delivered in a way that, visually speaking, you know, arguably is a little bit exposition heavy. So there's that. Again, sticking with the killer, he kind of looks like Uncle Fester. It's just like this pasty guy with kind of like blacked out sort of eyes. You know, looks a little bit goofy, I'm going to say. And he, on a pragmatic level, he looks, he's not like some supernatural guy, okay? This is just a dude. So he's easily recognisable. So it's not like a guy who can be blending into society. You know, if you were to put a description out, he would be pretty kind of recognisable. Which leads me to, okay, well, how have there not been sightings and things like this? And he should be kind of quite easily kind of identifiable by the members of the public on a hotline and things like this. What's he been doing when he's not killing? But he's not like it's like supernatural enough where he's particularly threatening. So he's kind of in this middle ground where he kind of looks odd, but enough to make him kind of stick out in a crowd. So he's not blending in like a kind of a real life serial killer, but he's not also particularly visually scary like, you know, your Jason Voorhees and things like that. So he occupies this ground where I feel he's neither particularly scary looking, but also odd enough that he would stick out. And ultimately, if you're looking more of the serial killer than the slasher route, he'd be fairly kind of obvious to at least put information on about. So again, I thought they should have gone one way or the other with this one. It's the way he kind of is filmed as well. It's a little bit like when we have low budget vampire movies. He wears like this mouth guard with R.I.P on it, and you know, you've got to show it to the camera at every opportunity. And so it's like when we have low budget vampire movies and that they've got to show you the fangs just to kind of, so you know that, oh look, we've paid for fangs here. And it's the same with this. So it's a little bit sort of feels a bit unnatural at times how this guy's kind of always like showing his mouth guard to the camera at times. A small point, I know, nitpicky, I appreciate it. But, you know, it could have stood out to me. Now, I mentioned there was a little bit of ADR work done. There are times here where I did feel some of the dialogue feels a little unnatural at times. It feels like it's coming from a recording booth, not through the actual kind of dialogue that we see on screen. So although I appreciate the dialogue may have been not particularly well picked up on set when it was, or on location when it's being filmed, probably because a lot of ambient noise and stuff. But at the same time, sometimes the dialogue has a kind of an artificial feel to it. On the subject of dialogue, let's talk about some of the acting. Sometimes I struggled to hear what was being said. Sometimes I felt some actors mumbled or spoke quite like softly or almost like a whisper. There was one character who's got an accent. I couldn't really understand what they were saying. So the dialogue is a little on the difficult side. And again, maybe you don't want to have it too obviously ADR'd and stuff, but at the same time, it presents a problem because there are occasions where it's hard to kind of hear sometimes through a variety of reasons. And also, you know, arguably say this is a lower budget movie. The acting, you know, for the most part, I think it's probably okay for this kind of style of movie. But there are maybe a few scenes where I would say the acting is a little bit on the weaker side, as you'd probably expect with a lower budget film like this. The movie's pacing, as I've kind of alluded to with the police, although I kind of quite appreciated the kind of the more realistic take on the police. Just the movie in general has a kind of a slower paced feel to it, and there's long stretches without any dialogue where we have characters kind of like pottering around on screen doing things, but maybe with little to no dialogue, with just ambient noise kind of playing in the background and stuff. So the movie has this slower pace in either kind of storyline. I have to say I found the police storyline the more interesting of the two, because you do feel that there was momentum in that story, although the kind of younger person, that, you know, it's filled with personal beef and all the rest of it, and like, you know, teenage rivalry and stuff. It's not as interesting if you ask me. But the general pace is a little on the kind of the slower side, and this killer I think maybe needed to show up a little more, maybe be a little bit more brutal on the actual attacks that we do see. Again, I can appreciate this is a lower budget film and they probably don't have masses of money to do elaborate VFX, but you do feel it lacks a little bit of ferocity in this kind of like its attacks, and feels a little bit tame to a degree, especially when we are considering that this is a killer that is, you know, primarily a dental killer, so to speak. Never really kind of, I think, it lacks the kind of that real visceral impact that it could have had it been a little bit more hardcore in regards to gore and kills and things like this. And just the way this killer seems to be able to pop up and sort of appear almost like he's supernatural and he isn't. So there's a few kind of like things here that I feel that the movie wants to have these kind of slasher tropes, but when you think about the reality of this corporeal killer, you know, it doesn't quite hold up. Overall, it's an okay slasher movie. You've got to appreciate this is a lower budget movie, so there are going to be shortcomings for a film like this that it's not going to be able to overcome. I appreciated the attempt to have a sprawling cast, multiple kind of story arcs, and quite an in-depth backstory. But I think it kind of maybe lacks a little bite, and the killer I think is a little misjudged. So for me, it's a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Would you see it based on what I've told you? Please let me know your thoughts and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.